The following presentation was recorded at the 2025 Southeast Linuxfest in Charlotte, North Carolina. It is licensed under a Creative Commons license. For more information on the Southeast Linuxfest, visit www.southeastlinuxfest.org. Come join us next June.
So just out of curiosity, has anybody played around with Red Hat Satellite Server or Foreman? Okay, cool. If you've already stood it up and you're already familiar with it, this is going to probably be a little bit basic because this is about getting the system installed and sort of understanding like what the nuances of the installer are, and things like how do you set up your templates and fairly basic stuff. But hopefully, if you have any questions, I'll be able to answer them. All right, I am showing that it is 11 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. My name is Thomas Cameron. I am a senior principal solution architect at Red Hat. I started at Red Hat back in 2005. I left for a little while and went to AWS, but as I mentioned earlier, I realized the folly of my ways, and now I'm back at Red Hat, and I plan on retiring from here. My contact information is up there. I am thomas@redhat.com. That's how long I've been there. So we are going to, and I have to tell you that I made a little oopsie last night while I was packing my laptop. I did an SCP the wrong direction, and so I overwrote my entire slide deck with the template file. So we're going to be doing a whole bunch of screenshots and cool stuff like that, and I will redo the slide deck, and it'll be posted on the website, and you'll be able to get to it. But today, what we're going to be talking about is just a little bit about Foreman, specifically Foreman and Katello, and how they relate to Red Hat Satellite Server. I'm going to go through the installation because installing Foreman or Satellite is really, really important, and there are a million options that you can use. I'm going to show you the ones that I did, and I'm going to explain why I did it the way that I did it. We're going to talk about setting up content credentials, set up sync plans so that you can mirror information, basically repositories off the internet. I'm going to talk about what a product is. I'm going to show you how to check your sync status. I'm going to show you the things that you need to set up so that Foreman or Satellite can work with your environment. You need to tell the the Foreman server. Sorry, I work with Satellite during my day job, but this is a community thing. So if I say Satellite, I mean Foreman. But you need to tell your Foreman server about your environment. You need to tell them about what your locations look like. You need to set up your lifecycle environments, so dev, QA, prod kind of thing. You need to set up content views, which is how you're going to determine what products are going to be available to a distribution. You're going to set up you're going to need to tell the satellite server about any domains you serve, your subnets. And then you're going to set up what are called host collections. And you could think of host collections as being just your promotion flows, like, what I'm going to publish to development, what I'm going to publish to QA, what I'm going to publish to production, and so on. I want to talk a little bit about provisioning templates because there are a handful of provisioning templates that you need to associate with your environment. This will make sense in a little while. How many folks have just done like kickstart or something similar to that? So you're at least familiar with the idea of like being able to kickstart a server or things like that. Think of the provisioning templates as basically a kickstart on steroids, and I'll talk about that more in a little while. We'll talk about activation keys, how to register systems to your Foreman or Satellite server, how to organize your systems in host groups, how to define compute resources, and time permitting, we will set up a machine, and I'll show you what this looks like when you tie it all together. So where did Katello where did Foreman and Katello come from? Foreman is the upstream to Red Hat Satellite Server. And by upstream, I mean, you're probably familiar with Red Hat Enterprise Linux. The upstream community distro for Red Hat Enterprise Linux is the Fedora project. Well, just like Fedora is the upstream to Red Hat Enterprise Linux, Satellite's upstream is Foreman and Catello. Now, Foreman is the tool for just, setting up all your servers and stuff like that. Catello is the plugin that handles content management. So it's responsible for, syncing content from the internet and making it available. Together, they provide an end-to-end life cycle management for systems, and that's everything from provisioning to configuration, content and patch management, and so on and so forth. Now, I am going to bail on my slide deck because, like I said, I accidentally nuked my slide deck, but I am logged on to my Foreman server in Austin, so if I need to do any demos, I can show it from there. But I do want to talk about how I installed my satellite server, or I'm sorry, my Foreman server. Super simple. In my hardware lab, I have a bunch of virtual machines. So I set up a virtual machine. I used RHEL 9.5. You could use CentOS Stream 9.5, or, there's no 0.5, but CentOS Stream 9. But for me, it made the most sense to use 9. So I did throw about 32 gigs of memory at my satellite or my Foreman server. You can get away with like 24 gigs of memory, but I got plenty of RAM in my my lab, so I did that. I threw 8 CPUs at it. I used 600 gigs of storage just to sync Fedora 42. It uses like 140 gigs. So if you're going to sync like Fedora and let's say CentOS 9 and CentOS 10, you're going to want big storage behind it. I gave it the name. I did customize it so that it would be bootable off the internet or off the networks. And the kickstart that I used, super simple, right? So you can see that it is, for the most part, just, a very straightforward kickstart. And the thing that I want to point out is that my hard drive, because I'm doing this in a lab, I didn't partition it or anything like that. It's just one giant volume in a production environment. You would want to, let me go back. You would want to partition it in a sane fashion, and I'll show you what that looks like. But I also did something that was really important, and that is that I set up SSH keys for the Ansible management account, because I did all my deployment through Ansible. If you're going to be doing this in production, please follow the instructions in the installation guide for Satellite. It'll tell you what your partition sizes need to be. And where it says varlib pulp needs to be 300 gigs, it is not lying. If you're going to sync more than 1 or 2 distros, like my final version of this was a 2 terabyte server. So 2 terabytes of storage. All right, so I kickstarted the machine, it booted up, it did the installation, and then I used, as I said, Ansible to install the prerequisites. The prerequisites for a Foreman server with Catello are that you have to install Puppet, because under the hood it does use Puppet to do the installation. I don't use Puppet beyond that. I installed that, and then I installed the Foreman. So the Foreman release, and it is really sensitive. Make sure that you're using the latest version of the Foreman. So I did that. It was installed. Be aware that for Foreman packages, you need to go to the Foreman Yum page and find the GPG signature file. It took me a little while to figure out what it was, but I downloaded that, and you can see that what I did was I downloaded it, I imported it, and then I was able to install. So that's where I installed the Catello RPM, the Foreman RPM. Then I set the firewall rules. There's a huge list of ports that you need to have open, but there is a built-in firewall rule called RH Satellite 6 and RH Satellite 6 Capsule. Just make sure both of those are applied, and then you need to add MQTT if you're going to be doing some advanced stuff that I'm not even going to talk about right here. So I set the firewall rules. Made sure that the Foreman installer Catello package was installed. And then this is the help screen for the installer. Actually, this is the 10 pages. It's like there, all this, all these crazy things. I'm not even going to go into what all of them are. But what I wound up doing was, you can see it's insane. Come on. There we go. Whoops. What I actually wound up doing was I used a very basic installation. I used the Foreman installer with scenario of Catello so that I could do content management. I defined my organization. I defined my location. I defined the username and password. Now, for a basic installation, this will work. In my environment, this is what I actually wound up using. And let me make this a little bit larger so that you can see it. Come on. So I did a pretty big installation. The 10,000 foot overview is I enabled TFTP and Pixie. I enabled DNS. I enabled DHCP. I enabled libvirt management and things like that. So this will be on the slide deck. You would only add in the components that you need for your environment. If you're not managing libvirt hypervisors, you don't need to add this in. So just be aware of that. So, all right, let me get back to, there we go. So I did the installation, and then I want to pop over to setting up credentials. Now, setting up credentials, pretty straightforward. When you log on to the server for the first time, you'll have to do the, hey, yeah, it's a self-signed certificate, use the username and password, log in, you'll see the dashboard, and then you'll go down to content, go to content credentials, click on create a content credential. I used the GPG key for Fedora 42 because I'm going to be syncing Fedora 42. So just be aware that you need to have that. So that's the file. In that content credentials, I said add a content credential, and it looks like this. I gave it a key name. I browsed to the file. I could have copied and pasted. And then I made sure that the content credential had been installed. Let's go to, now I need to synchronize, I need to set up, I should say, a sync plan. Super simple. You're just telling the satellite server, go grab this content and suck it down. So you go into content, go to sync plans, define the sync plan. I run mine every morning at 2 o'clock in the morning. And that's it. Boom, you're done. That is what the nightly sync plan looks like. Then I had to define a product. And this is where it can be a little bit hard to wrap your head around. Think of a product as a distribution, okay? So I gave the product name just Fedora 2 everything because I wanted to be able to install, KDE or XFCE or whatever. I associated it with the GPG key from the Fedora project, and I associated it with that nightly sync. So that's why I did the sync first and the credential first. Once I did that, clicked on save, and now I say, for this product, I need to associate a repository. Notice there are no repositories on there, so I'm going to click on Add, and I'm going to say, this is the Fedora 42 repository. It is a yum type of repository, so I click the drop-down. I give it the upstream URL, so in this case, it's dl.fedoraproject.org/blah, blah, blah, blah. A couple of things that I do want to point out is that you have the option of choosing whether you want to do an on-demand sync, which means the first time somebody requests a package, it's going to download it to the Foreman server, or you can say, nope, I want to do immediate. Please do immediate. If you do on-demand, you're going to have unhappy customers. Don't do that. And then you can check the mirroring policy. The default is content only. I recommend that you do mirror complete. It grabs all the metadata. It's going to make your life a lot faster. So again, change that to complete mirroring and associate it with the Fedora key. Click on save. And then I did the same thing for updates. So just the installation tree is fine, but you need to be able to do updates locally as well. So I just did exactly the same thing. I just pointed it at the updates directory, made sure that it was complete mirroring, and boom, now I have my repositories, both for the installation and also for the updates. So that's what that looks like. I click on add, and now they're part of the product. And when I did my synchronization, I started out with almost nothing in varlib pulp. By the time I was done, it was 135 gigs. So again, you can use a lot of space. When I did the synchronization, I just watched the job, and so once I've synchronized that content, I can also go over and I can just look at the synchronization status. So I go to content, sync status, expand it. You can see the content as it's being synchronized, and eventually it'll say syncing complete. Notice that it says that was a 2-hour synchronization job. So just be aware that that can take a little bit of time. Oops. All right. Would you stop? Okay, the next thing that I need to do is I need to define for the satellite or the Foreman server, I need to define my locations. So in other words, when I did the installation, I said the default location was going to be Austin because my office is in Austin. But if I want to, I can go into the locations and I can say, hey, what if I have an office in Dallas, for instance, because I'm a Texas boy. So I'd put in the name. I have to tell the Foreman server about the attributes of that location. So I click on Dallas. I need to associate it with my capsules or smart proxies. So I just click on add the Foreman server. And then I also need to go through and say, this is going to be available for the os.redhat.com domain. And that should have been dallas.redhat.com. Sorry. I made a mistake. But then I also need to say this is going to be, this location is going to be available in the Red Hat organization. So I add the Red Hat organization, and now I have 2 locations, Dallas and Austin. So what I can do next, once I have told the satellite server about my locations, I need to define my lifecycle environments. And lifecycle environments are super simple. By default, the content that is loaded onto the Foreman server goes into the library. What you do with it from there is up to you. In my case, for a simple demo, I said, okay, stuff that's in the library, I will then promote to my development environment. I would subscribe systems to that development environment, and I would do whatever development work on them I need. And then once I get that defined, I would subscribe systems to my QA environment. I could do my QA testing on those systems. And then when I'm done, I would create a production environment, subscribe systems to that production environment, and manage them in prod. So super, super simple. You just need to define what your workflow is going to be. So library to dev to QA to prod, that's what I did for demo purposes. Whatever you do in your environment, you would do, based on your needs. The next thing that I need to do is I need to define content views. So content views are how I'm going to present content to my systems. So for instance, let's say I want to have a content view that I'm going to present to my Fedora systems, and I'm going to call it, not very creative, but I'm going to call it the Fedora 42 content view. I'm going to choose that it's going to be a simple content view. If I want to do dependency solving every time I publish a content view, I would check that button. I have found that can increase your synchronization or your content view publishing by a factor of like 3x. And I have never had a case where doing depth solving during content promotion like helped me. So I leave it unchecked, but now that I've got the content view defined, I need to associate those repositories with it. So I click on Add Repositories. I check the boxes for the Fedora repository and the Fedora Updates repository. Click on Add, and you can see that now they're added over on the right-hand side. If you want to do filters, this is kind of cool. If you want to do filters, because let's say you want to make absolutely sure that like no one's going to install some tool that you don't want in your environment. For me, I created a filter for Emacs that said we're not going to allow, it's an exclude filter. We're not going to allow any packages that are called Emacs because Vim is life and Vim is the best editor out there. Some of y'all are not old enough to understand that humor. But for those of you who do, I searched for Emacs and look what Google said. So what I did was I said, for this filter, I'm going to click on add an RPM rule. I'm going to search for whatever the RPM is. In this case, I just typed in Emacs and it gave me a list and I clicked on, yep, that's what I want. So I'm going to add that rule. Now I have a filter added. So when I publish this content to my enterprise, it's not going to have the Emacs RPM available. So it's just a way of filtering content. Now, just because I've created the content view doesn't mean I've made it available to systems that are registered to the Foreman server. So I have to then do what's called publishing. So I click on the publish button. I can click on the promote button. Remember earlier that I set up the dev environment, the QA environment, and the production environment. For now, for this first time, I'm going to say I want all of those to have access to this content. As I start syncing new stuff, I might only promote it to dev. And then once I've done my development work, I might promote it to QA and then do my QA testing, and then I would promote it to production. But for now, for this example, I'm going to do all three of them. So I do the promotion, click on finish, and it will publish that content out so that it is consumable by systems which are registered to the satellite server. And it takes a while. Like I said, man, it takes a long time. This one took like 22 minutes just to publish that content view. But now I have the content view, it's available. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about telling the satellite server a little bit more about your environment. By default, when you click on, when you're doing satellite, it will only see the domain that you defined when you first built the machine. But what if you have multiple domains? Like I've got austin.redhat.com and I've got dallas.redhat.com. So when you're defining domains, what I recommend is that you change from whatever your default organization is to any organization. That way, when you define the domain, you can say for this domain, it's going to be associated with the Red Hat organization or your organization, and so on. So I click on Red Hat, change it to any organization, and then I click on domains. I click on create domain. I'm going to say, I'm going to choose the Austin domain, for instance, and there is that domain that was created by the installer, right? So I look at it. I'm going to make sure that it's associated with the correct locations that we defined earlier. So in this case, it's the Austin location, and I'm going to make sure that it's associated with the correct organization. Now I'm going to choose the Dallas domain. Click on create domain. I'm going to call it dfw.redhat.com. Make sure that it's associated with the Dallas location. Make sure it's associated with the Red Hat organization, and click on submit. And now I have both of those domains, austin.redhat.com and dfw.redhat.com. Oops. All right. Yeah, there we go. Now, once I've done that, again, I'm back to telling the satellite server about my infrastructure. So I need to define subnets. So if I go in there and again, I look at the Austin location, I can define a subnet. I give it a name, Austin subnet. I give it a network address, 172.31.100.0/24. Give it things like the gateway address and the DNS server address and things like that. If you're doing a simple installation, you don't need to define your IPAM resources. Because I'm doing DHCP from my satellite server, I defined my DHCP range and so on. All right, so for the subnet, once I've defined all that, like the range of addresses and stuff like that, I also, again, need to say this DHCP range is going to be managed by this capsule server, or in this case, this smart proxy server. So I'm going to add the Foreman server to that. I'm going to make sure that it's serving the Austin domain, and I'm going to associate it with the capsule services that the Foreman server does. In this case, my Foreman server does DHCP, it does TFTP, it'll actually do HTTP boot, it'll do reverse DNS, it'll store templates for installations, and it will do discovery across my network. So I did a very complex installation, so all of those showed up. If I'd done a really simple installation, it would only show up for the DHCP proxy, for instance, or the TFTP proxy. But I'm going to set all those to be my proxy, make sure that it serves the locations that I care about, and boom, now I have the Austin subnet. Lather, rinse, and repeat for Dallas. So again, go through Dallas, same type of steps. I'm going to move real quickly through it because we are really time constrained. Add the proxies in, make sure that the Dallas location is selected, and now I've got the Dallas subnet. So once I've done that, I'm going to get a little bit more granular, and now I'm going to define what are called host collections. Think of a host collection as, like I said, just where I'm going to put systems that I manage, what logical grouping I'm going to put them into. It's just, for human consideration. So I'm going to, again, make sure that I choose any location. And I'm going to say, I'm going to create a host collection that is called my development machine, or my development host collection. And that's it. I've created it. Then I do the same thing for QA, and I do the same thing for production. This is just a logical grouping for us humans. It's not complicated, but again, you want to make sure that you're defining whatever makes sense in your environment. So once I've done the host collections, now it's going to get a little bit more complicated. And when and by complicated, I don't really mean that complicated, but there are a lot of steps that you have to do here to make sure that the provisioning templates that are going to be used for your environment are going to be available for your satellite server. Because if you'll notice, there are provisioning templates on there for like SUSE machines, for YAST machines, for, just tons of different stuff. Only a few of them are going to be associated with what you're going to be building if you're building Red Hat-based systems. So Fedora, CentOS, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, etc. It took me a long time to figure out which ones do I care about. I'm going to show you a secret kind of towards the end of the session where you can figure out exactly the ones that you need. But for the short term, the ones that you need, again, we want to go to any organization so that you can see all of the templates that are available. But the ones that you want to deal with are the Kickstart default Pixie Grub and Pixie Grub 2 templates, because those are used for provisioning systems that are using Pixie Grub or Pixie Grub 2. So you're going to click on it. The only thing you really care about here is just making sure that the associations are right. In this case, it was already associated with Fedora 42. And you want to make sure that the right locations are associated with this template. So I'm going to add Dallas to it. And then I'm going to do the same thing for Pixie Grub 2. Same thing. Make sure that the location is set correctly. Same thing for default Pixie Linux. That is the template for doing a default installation. This is the one that you're probably going to mess with the most post installation. But again, you want to make sure that the locations are set correctly. Then you're going to do the same thing for the default kickstart finish template. That is what the system is going to do once it is kickstarted. Like, is it going to register to the satellite or to the Foreman server and so on? So make sure that that's associated. Make sure that the Linux host init config default is also associated with the locations that you care about. The default kickstart iPixie, in case you're using that, and the kickstart default template. And this will all make sense when I get to the part where we kickstart. And then the kickstart default user data, same thing. And I know that that seems like kind of overwhelming and crazy. There is a method to the madness, and I'll show you how and why in just a few minutes. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to set up activation keys. And an activation key is just telling the system that we're kickstarting how to register to the Foreman server. So choose the organization, go into activation keys and choose create an activation key. I created a development activation key, and then you can see I associated it with the development environment. When I did that, I was able to associate it with the content view. So it's going to be that Fedora 42 content view that you can't see Emacs on. So I'm going to save that. Make sure that the repository sets that are associated with it are turned on, because the default behavior is for them to be turned off. So just check those two boxes for the two repositories, the Fedora 42 and the Fedora 42 updates, and then click on the little box on the right-hand side that says override to enabled. Once you do that, you're going to have those repositories that are available, and then you need to say, this development activation key is going to be associated with which host collection. That's why you have to do all these things first. You set the host collection, you associate the activation key with it, and then again, lather, rinse, and repeat for dev, QA, and prod. So there's my development host collection. I then created the QA and the prod host collections, and then I want to set up my host groups. Remember that the host groups are the just logical organizations that we are putting systems together with. So I'm going to go into my host group, and this is where you can do some kind of cool stuff. So I'm going to give it a name, development host group. I can say what capsule server it's going to be pulling from, and notice that I associate the host group with the lifecycle environment. That's why you have to do all these steps in this kind of wonky order. But I associate it with the development environment. I associate it with that content view, which is the content for Fedora 42. And notice that the default behavior is that it's being deployed on bare metal. You can override that and say, no, I want to do this on a hypervisor. But I'll come back and I'll show you what that looks like in a little while. Associate it with the appropriate network that you want it to be attached to. So in my case, I'm doing aus.redhat.com, and I chose the subnet for my home lab in Austin. Make sure that you've associated with the correct operating system. So in this case, I'm choosing the architecture, which is x86-64, the operating system, which is Fedora 42, the content that's associated with that operating system, which includes the Fedora 42 repository. I can specify the partition table. The default behavior is that it is going to boot Pixie Linux off of a BIOS system. If you had UEFI or UEFI or something like that, you can drop that in there. I set the root password, so any system that I'm kickstarting from this host group is going to have the password that I define there. You have to associate it with those locations. So in this case, Austin. And then kind of one of the magic things is you can say for this host group, I want this activation key to be associated with it. So I click the drop down, I choose that development activation key. Once I submit that, now I have a host group that does all the things, right? It registers the satellite server. It is associated with the correct host group, or is with the correct activation key. All of those things are tied together. So again, did that across all 3 of those host groups, but you're not limited to 3. You just set it up for whatever is in your environment. And then you can optionally define what are called compute resources. If you're using a hypervisor, in my case, I'm using RHEL 10 hypervisors with libvirt. What you can do is you can become the Foreman user on the Foreman server. So I just did sudo su space - Foreman and then define the shell that you want to use. So I did /bin/bash, run SSH gen key, or I'm sorry, SSH keygen, create an SSH key, and then I copied that key over to a hypervisor. In my case, it was a hypervisor called case.os.redhat.com. And so I did SSH copy ID. Now I did it as the Ansible user just because the Ansible user, in this case it's called sysadmin, is a member of the libvirt group, so it can start and stop virtual machines. It's going to depend on what your hypervisor looks like as to what this, is going to work like. But just for simple demo purposes, I have an account that is part of the libvirt group on Case that allows me to launch virtual machines. Once I have set up that SSH key, I can define Case as a compute resource. So I say, I'm going to create the compute resource. I'm going to give it a name, case.os.redhat.com. I have to choose the provider. Because I installed this Foreman server with the libvirt modules, I get this drop down that says libvirt. Had I said, no, I'm going to be using like VMware instead, then my installer argument would have been different and I would get a different drop down. One of the things that I want to point out is that if you do something wonky during your installation, you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot the VMware support or whatever. It's okay. Run Foreman installer -- whatever the argument that you need. You can rerun the installer as many times as you want. It is idempotent. It won't like overwrite your database or anything like that. So if you forget something, and believe me, I have repeatedly, just rerun the installer. Having said that, I'm using libvirt. So you can see that I put the libvirt URL, which is QEMU plus SSH hostname. I'm sorry, user at hostname /system. And I choose the display type to be VNC. Make sure you uncheck the box that says create a random VNC password. Because if you ever want to get a remote console onto your machine, it's a random password and you don't have it. So I uncheck that box. Make sure you click on the test connection button down at the bottom. And sure enough, it came back and it said the test connection was successful. And associate the compute resource with whatever location it's at. In my case, it's in Austin. Submit those changes. And there I have my compute resource. Now, it's a lot of crazy steps. I recognize that. We've covered a lot of cool things, but let's see what happens when we put it all together. So one thing that I do want to point out is I made a couple of changes to my Foreman server. So I logged in, or I went down to the settings down at the very bottom. If you go to administer, go to settings, and then you'll go over to the provisioning tab. One thing that I found is that by default, the VM that comes up is advertising VNC to the whole network. I don't want that. I want it only to be available to local host because I'm using the virtualization manager that I SSH or I have an SSH connection to it. So I want that connection to be available over that localhost SSH. So this is just something I do for my lab. But I go into there, I change the value to 127.0.0.1. And then once I do that, I'm going to say I want to create a host. So I go into host, create host, click on, put a name in if you want. It'll auto-generate this crazy name. Associate it with the right organization, associate it with the right location, and associate it with the right development or the host group. And in my case, because I associated it with the development host group, and I associated the hypervisor with the development host group, this gives me the option to say, I'm not doing this on bare metal, I want to do it on a virtual machine. That's why we have to do the steps in this kind of wonky order. I know it seems overwhelming, but once you get all of these steps done, you can do some amazing stuff. So I'm going to say case.redhat.com. It's in the development environment. I can then change the virtual machine settings. Like the default is 1 CPU and 2 gigs of memory. I bumped that up to 4 CPUs, 4 gigs of memory. And I changed the disk size from being 10 gigs to 40 gigs. And I said, I want to do a full allocation of the entire 40 gigs. Under operating system, you'll see that it is already defined with x86 64, with Fedora 42, and so on and so forth. Just verify that stuff. And then click on submit. Before you click on submit, though, notice that it says that you can resolve all of the templates. So when I was saying, hey, you need to do all these templates, it's not just me being weird. Those are the templates that are associated with the kickstart. Once I did this, and I was like, oh, I forgot about the Linux host init config default. So again, that's where that came from. Click on submit. Notice that in my environment, because I have it managing DNS and DHCP and PXE and TFTP and all that stuff, it auto-populated my IP address. It actually creates under varlib TFTP pixielinux.cfg, it creates a MAC address config file with a personalized or a customized kickstart for this VM that I've just defined. So when I check that the parameters are good and the additional information is good and click on submit, I see the machine, and over here in my virtual machine manager, it boots up. Notice that it has one option and one option only. Kickstart default PXE Linux. So I click on, I just let it time out or hit enter. It does the kickstart. It reboots the machine. And when it boots up afterwards, the default setting is that the VM is going to boot off the network first. But the Foreman server is smart enough to say, hey, your default boot is to boot off the local machine. Now, it does introduce a 20-second delay, but for lab environments, who cares? But it boots off the hard drive. Now I've got my machine called James Gozer dot, whatever, like I defined in there. And in 42 minutes, we have gone through what it takes to set all of this up. Now, it took me, seriously, like probably a year of working at Red Hat before I got satellite server to where I was super, super comfortable doing it. This is the bare minimum that you need to get a satellite / Foreman server set up. You're going to learn a lot. There's a lot to learn. I didn't even talk about what it takes to do things like copy templates and associate them so that you can do your own package manifest and things like that. There's a lot more involved. But if you want to learn this, and you want to be able to go to maybe a potential employer and say, yeah, I've deployed satellite server and I'm using it to manage my CentOS and my Fedora and my, whatever machines, like that's kind of a valuable skill. So hopefully that's the benefit of working with open source is you can hammer on the upstream stuff and say legitimately to potential employers or to existing employers, hey, you know what? I tested this out. It works really well. It's super, it's simple-ish, and it's functional. We should go ahead and do this. So anyway, that is a lot of information in a ridiculously short amount of time. I'll open it up to any questions, and we will wrap up in about a minute. Any questions? I know it's a ton of information in a short amount of time. Yes?
Yeah, what's
Hold on. Can you put the because we're recording this, let's go ahead and get your voice on here too.
Hello. I was trying to find out what's Red Hat's official position when it comes to, I guess, syncing Debian repositories.
Mm-hmm.
I set up a satellite in the past, but as best I could. But I had some trouble trying to implement like mixed environments.
Sure.
And I read in the past it wasn't supported, but where's that now?
It is not supported. Foreman, the upstream, gives you the ability to sync debs, .deb files for like Ubuntu or Debian or whatever. We guarantee that if it breaks, you get to keep all the pieces, and that's it. Because we don't support Debian, we don't support Ubuntu. Like, that's not our distro. So there's no way that we can reasonably support that commercially. I'm talking about upstream, though. If something breaks, like, file a bug, open, raise the red flag. I'm not promising that anyone's going to fix it because we're focused on RPM-based distros. But the community, the Foreman community is pretty cool. So if you run into something, please do raise it and we'll see what we can do. I cannot make any guarantees from a commercial standpoint, though. Okay? Yes, sir.
Is satellite covered under the developer license?
No. And I wish it was, man. I really wish it was. The reason it's not is because you have to have the smart management entitlement and there's a cost associated with that. But dude, seriously, do Foreman. Like, you can learn on Foreman and then take what you learned there. And the cool thing about this is I cannot tell you how many times I've burned my Foreman server to the ground because I'm like, I forgot something and then I did something really stupid to try to remedy it. So I nuked it. Now I have my installer scripts and my installer playbooks. I can be back up and running in less than an hour. And now I also mirror Fedora and CentOS to a local repository. So when I do my synchronization, it's going across a 10 gigabit link to a mirror. But yeah, I could be back up and running completely in like an hour. Any other questions? Was this helpful? I know that it was a lot of information, but was this helpful? All right, cool. Y'all, we are over. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. And if you have any questions or anything like that, thomas@redhat.com. Thank you, folks.